President Trump, you have committed to us, hostage families, when meeting us, that you will bring all of them back home.
The killing of journalists in Gaza should shock the world, and those responsible must be held accountable.
So we have 20, but there's rumors that some could be dead. It's a terrible situation over there.
There's nothing conclusive, but hopefully we're going to have things solved very quickly with regard to Gaza.
Well, the man running point on the U.S. effort to help end the fighting in Gaza and also the situation in Ukraine joins us tonight for an exclusive interview. Steve Witkoff is the President's special envoy for Peace Missions. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure, Brett. Thank you.
Let's start with Israel-Gaza. Who is holding up the end of the war more, Israel or Hamas?
Hamas.
Hamas,
Certainly.
100%.
Yes. There's been a deal on the table for the last 6 or 7 weeks that would have released 10 of the hostages out of the 20 who we think are alive. And it was Hamas who slow-played that process, and it is Hamas now who's saying we accept that deal. And I think in large part they're saying that and changing their mind because the Israelis are putting some very intense pressure on them.
So do you think Hamas should be completely destroyed, as Prime Minister Netanyahu says?
You know, that's not my call. I think that there needs to be a deal. There needs to be hostages sent home. There would be a commensurate amount of Palestinian prisoners who would be sent home too. Every time we see a hostage release, we see jubilation on both sides. And Hamas understands that they can have nothing to do with the government going forward. Those are terms of the Israelis and they're terms of President Trump as well.
So I guess the question is, should Israel be doing anything differently to end the war and get the hostages home? Well, why do you see optimism in bringing this to an end?
We think that we're going to settle this one way or another, certainly before the end of this year. Hamas is now signaling that they're open to a settlement. The Israelis, when they announced this operation, also announced at the same time that they were funding $600 million of aid to go into Gaza. And in addition to that, they also announced that they were open to continuing discussions with Hamas. So it's not a maximalist approach on the Israelis' part. They're indicating that they have accommodations to make if Hamas decides to make them. And we've suggested, by the way, that Hamas can begin by feeding the hostages, by giving them medical attention, by letting the Red Cross in, by doing the humane thing. The president is a humanitarian. That's what he wants to see.
And we've talked to some of those released hostages on this very set. Israeli officials say they'll no longer accept a partial deal for the return of hostages. Is that where you are now?
That's the official position, and that's President Trump's official position. I think that he has said to himself that you don't need to keep those hostages. We'll have a negotiation if they want as to what next day it looks like in Gaza after this is all done and what the definition of Hamas is. We can talk about those things, but we adamantly want, and I'm following the president's direction here when I say this, all of those hostages home.
This week, obviously, we had Israel killing journalists and rescue workers when this hospital was targeted. There were Hamas leaders there. What is the reaction to that? And are there red lines with the Trump administration and how Israel is moving forward with this?
Well, anytime you have civilian deaths, it's a tragedy. The president, he feels it. You know, the president has met almost every single hostage family. I mean, he is as compassionate a man as I know. So anytime you have civilian hostages, that's problematic. But it's a war. And part of what we're trying to do is shut that war down. It doesn't need to continue to happen anymore. And I think that Hamas has held that region hostage for much too long, and it's time for it to end. And I think many of the Arab governments, by the way, are in that camp as well.
Last thing, you know, it's obviously a very dangerous situation on the ground, but there is a want for journalists to get in there and to tell the story on the ground.
Yeah.
We've had Bill Hemmer get in on the outskirts there and inside. Is there a thought about that?
Well, I've been in there twice with, you know, a ceramic vest on, wearing my black Make America Great hat again, and people were cheering when they saw it. Not me, but for the president. He's very well acknowledged there, not just in Gaza, but in Israel. It is a very dangerous place. There's over 30,000 unexploded munitions all over the place. It is a demolition zone, and it's a tough place, and I'm sure Bill Hemmer told you that.
And it's
Worse
gonna
than
take
most
some time.
people would imagine.
It's
Yeah.
going to take some time. Is
Takes
there
some
a
time.
plan for a day after in Gaza?
Yes, we've got a large meeting in the White House tomorrow, chaired by the president, and it's a very comprehensive plan we're putting together on the next day that I think many people are going to be, they're going to see how robust it is and how well-meaning it is. And it reflects President Trump's humanitarian motives here.
Let me turn to Ukraine, Russia. Here's the president today.
Think of it, you have your son leaving Russia, leaving Ukraine, their little house, wherever they live with their parents, they're waving goodbye, and then a week later his head's blown off in a stupid war by a drone. So, no, I'd like it to stop. I want to get it to stop. And it will not be a world war, but it'll be an economic war. And an economic war is going to be bad. And it's going to be bad for Russia, and I don't want that.
Same question, different war. Who's more responsible for keeping this war going, Russia or Ukraine?
This is a different situation here. We've got these are two tough sides here. And you heard the president say that he's disappointed in Russia in some respects, and he's also disappointed in the Ukrainians in some respects. But I would point this out to you. No one has done more, and I'm talking about in the last 8 months, than this president in narrowing the issues between these two countries and bringing the sides close to a deal. The Russians have put a peace proposal on the table. It involves Donetsk. It may not be something that the Ukrainians can take, but no one's ever made that kind of progress here, and it's because of his force of personality and his motivation to end the conflict, end the death, that we're at this place where we think the end is in sight.
The next step was going to be a bilateral meeting. The Russians are signaling it doesn't seem to be happening. Is it going to go to a trilateral meeting, or how do you see the blueprint?
Well, first of all, I'm meeting with the Ukrainians this week, so I will be meeting with them this week in New York, and that's a big signal. We talk to the Russians every day. I think that we may end up seeing a bilateral meeting. My own opinion is that the president is going to be needed at the table to finish a deal. President Putin at the Alaska summit, Brett, actually acknowledged that this war would never have happened if the president had been in office.
But did he also say that at that Alaska summit that he wanted peace? Did he tell you that he wanted to bring an end to the war?
Absolutely. There's a peace proposal on the table. He has certainly said that, and hopefully he stands by that.
I mean, you know that the critics out there say that this is Putin playing you all. How do you respond to that?
I think he has made a good faith effort to engage. He certainly did at the Alaska summit, but it's a very complicated conflict. But the president is determined to get this conflict done. Look, the president has done God's work on 7 separate conflicts here, and why? Because at heart, he's a humanitarian. At heart, he wants to see the killing end. And I can tell you this, I just hope that when it comes time to assess, from a Nobel Peace Prize standpoint, the type of work that President Trump has done, that it's widely acknowledged exactly what has happened out there on the world stage.
We've talked a lot about it. We've talked about India, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia. We've talked about Congo, Rwanda. We've talked about all of those. But
the Houthis, I mean, all of it.
This one really is a sticking point. Should Ukraine be forced to give up land that Russian forces have not yet conquered?
Well, the president has said that the only one who can make that decision are the Ukrainians. That's President Zelensky's call. And I think that they have indicated that it's a more complicated decision than just giving up land. They have to understand what the security guarantees are, and they're entitled to understand those things. They have to make sure that this can never happen again. That is them being a fiduciary for their people. So we have to address all of those things, but we understand that. We have technical teams working on it, and we're hopeful that by the end of this year, we actually, and maybe quite a bit sooner, we actually can find the ingredients to get to that peace deal.
Sergei Lavrov saying that the Ukrainian president is illegitimate. The president saying today that's all posturing and BS. You agreed with him as we played that soundbite. But what about the Trump administration, it did put maximum pressure on Iran, a maximum pressure campaign. Why not do the same with Russia? If you sense that they are stepping back from the table, why not drop the hammer and get them back to the table?
Well, that's an assessment that the president has to make, and he's got plenty of leverage, of levers to use if he makes that call.
Because you sense that the Russian economy is faltering.
I don't know if I would say that. I would simply say that I think the president is disappointed. He really is. He's said it to me numerous times, and he's said it publicly. He's disappointed because he doesn't believe that it's not his war, and he doesn't believe it's a war that needs to continue. And he wants the death to stop as well. So I think that he looks at this as, I have to do everything I can. I am the man of the moment who can end this thing. I have to figure out how to do everything I can to bring the two sides together, and if I can't, to force them together.
Well, I know that there are a lot of people in this town, Democrats and Republicans, who wish you the best. So thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Brett.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.